Oh, hello, you guys. Welcome. Come on in to Warrior Wednesdays. This is the mental health edition. I am, child, I'm excited. I'm honored. I'm thrilled. This is such an important topic that we're going to talk about today in the world of infertility, fertility journeys. Hi, you guys. I see you beautiful warriors coming in. I miss you. I feel like it's been a while, even though it's only been a week. But welcome back to Warrior Wednesdays. Tell me where you are joining from. I'm so excited for you to meet the most amazing woman today. I had the pleasure of speaking with her very briefly, but she probably is one of the most important women that I'm able to talk to today, because not only is she a licensed therapist, a marriage and family therapist, but she specializes in therapy and coaching for women going through infertility and grief and loss. But she also is an infertility warrior herself. She has her own story. And one of the things that my mama used to always tell me, child, is it's harder to take advice from people that haven't walked your walk, that don't really understand. And it's not that you can't, but there is a different type of understanding when you're talking to someone that can relate because they've been through a similar experience or two. And we have that today. So welcome. Delaware is in here. Nichelle Polston is in here. You guys from Her Normal. How are you? Niecy's World Forever. Hello. You know, it was Niecy's birthday yesterday, child. So I hope that you all came in. I don't even see Mama Stu in here. So if she does come in later, we will get on her about that. Somebody is saying, okay. Oh no, I gotcha. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to bring in Dr. Loree Johnson. Send it to a friend. Let everybody know to come in here, okay? I'm going to bring in the woman. But let me just say this. She is a member of, I got to read this because this is a long title, which is, you know, I love a Black woman that does her thing. The American Society Reproductive Medicine's Mental Health Group Task Force. She is a member of the American Society's Reproductive Medicine's Mental Health Group Task Force. I'm so excited. Hi, Phenomenally Autistic. I see you. What's going on, Atlanta? Hi.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing so fantastic. Welcome to Warrior Wednesdays. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and I love what you're doing, and so excited to be able to talk to women and kind of share a little bit about my story, because we're all in this together.
We're all in this together, and we are really excited to hear about your story. Just so you know, Nichelle Polston, who I think you're familiar with,
Yes.
Her Normal. I call her the Bridge. She's also, as you know, a board member of Resolve, the national organization, the Infertility Association, and she is the one that led me to you. So I want to thank her here. And
Yes.
then we also have Regina Townsend from
my
Broken
yes.
Brown Egg is in the building. And I just saw Mama Sue is in the building. Now, Mama Sue is my mama.
Oh my goodness.
And I can't tell her age, but I will talk about her on this because we have so much to share, being mother and daughter in different experiences of fertility. But I would love to start with you, Dr. Loree, if I can.
Yeah.
First and foremost, can you just tell us a little bit about your fertility journey?
Absolutely. I was one of those ladies. I called myself a late bloomer. I was a professional student for a long time and finally finished all of my schooling in my early 30s, and then decided it's time for me to really start dating, and so I met my husband later in life, and I wasn't necessarily worried about my fertility at the time. I had heard multiple stories of women getting pregnant in their 40s or late 30s, and I expected that it would take a little bit longer, but I didn't expect it to unfold the way that it did. So that was probably probably, I think a little bit of how things started for me. I got married later in life, and then about 6 months after we got married, I decided, you know what, let's just see if I can get pregnant. And I was one of those people too that did get pregnant right away, but unfortunately, I lost. I started experiencing miscarriages, and then my second pregnancy loss was probably the one that people hear me talk the most about, where there was an issue with the child. We thought, we got through the dreaded first trimester, and then we learned our son was sick, and so sadly we had to say goodbye to him. And then after that, I didn't really have much time to grieve. And because of my age, I was thrust into fertility treatments and procedures, IVF. It wasn't like try IUI or anything like that. It's like, just go straight to IVF. And that didn't necessarily work for us. And then we got pregnant miraculously again after all of that. But again, nothing, I still don't have my rainbow, so to speak. And it's been a really tough journey professionally or personally, excuse me. And then, professionally, to work with women who are going through their own stories and trials and tribulations around trying to conceive. And here I've had this backstory that ultimately changed me personally and professionally.
Well, first and foremost, I want to say sorry for your losses.
Thank you.
Absolutely sorry for your losses. And you guys know what we do here on Warriors, and throw the flowers up. We like to throw the flowers up to you, to the heavens, to all the wonderfulness that is to be. And so we want to say thank you for sharing that. And it's amazing to me, because I think you are beyond the definition of not suffering in silence, due to the fact that your profession is to help those that are in a situation that you were experiencing yourself. So can you talk a little bit about the process of getting yourself actually there? Because my assumption, and this is my assumption, is that there's this whole level of strength that you need in order to help someone when you're experiencing something yourself, and possibly some freedom in that, but then another level of grief in that. So can you just talk to us a little bit about how you became this?
It's been a journey, and I'm so glad to be able to even talk publicly about this, because for a long time I kind of came from that school where just things were very private. And also as a therapist, we don't really share our feelings about how we feel about working with our clients. But there was something about going through what my clients were going through that, I said, like, really ultimately changed me. And while I was in, I think the depth of grief, and there was probably about a 2 to 3 year period where I had to work differently. I couldn't take on as many clients who were in the infertility community because, I was actively grieving, the loss of our son. And the grief is really intense. It's very intense. And I had a little bit more of a complicated or delayed grieving process too, because of just the timing with which we, when we lost our son. And then, they said, you need to go to IVF. And obviously anybody who's gone through fertility treatments knows that when you're in the middle of physically going through this process, yes, you're having an emotional experience, but you're still not able to do the deeper level work. And so it wasn't until after that, that I really kind of sat down with my therapist and really hashed out all of the ugly stuff that I was feeling and that I was dealing with, and having somebody hold space for me around this. And having that was, I think, very pivotal for me, because as a therapist, and, I think how we're taught and we're trained, we want to help people, we hold space. And so there were lots of times where I would just compartmentalize and really put my stuff on the back burner because my clients needed me. And I'm really good at focusing on, their pain, what they need, and making sure that they have the resources that they need to feel supported and to heal. And but it's also, it was hard to, really allow myself the space to do that because both of those kind of things took energy. And when you're grieving, you don't have a lot of it. So,
I
yeah.
have to say, okay, can we pause for a minute because
Yeah.
you said about 50 amazing things that I think we all can relate to
Hmm.
because you talked about delayed grief.
Yes.
You talked about compartmentalizing
Hmm.
because you had a responsibility.
Hmm.
And I think that everybody on here can agree. As women, we are coded to be nurturers, right?
Yes.
And then, especially, a lot of the people that are here on Warrior Wednesdays happen to be women of color, and especially Black women um, um, feel the sense of we got to keep it together. We
Hmm.
got to hold everybody and make everybody strong, and that our grief, our story actually gets set aside.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about what the effects of delayed grief is,
Hmm. Hmm.
and also meaning like the toll that it can take on us so that we can learn a little bit more about putting ourselves first unapologetically and
Yes.
without feeling guilty. So if we can talk a little bit about what the toll of delayed grief actually is.
The toll of delayed grief is where to even begin,
Right.
because you spend so much time just feeling emotionally exhausted, knowing that there's this big elephant in the room that you need to deal with. But I think for me, or some of the ways that you might see it present, is you feel really isolated. You don't feel like yourself. You might feel really irritated with other people, and your tolerance, your emotional capacity just feels very diminished. So and I keep going to irritation because that was probably the first way that it would show up for me. I was just angry about everything, and when you are trying to stay engaged with your family and friends, and particularly, there's lots of centered activities that you want to be a part of, but are really hard to be a part of at the same time. It's this constant reminder of what you have to deal with,
Mm-hmm.
and so you just don't feel like yourself. You feel so far removed from yourself. And so it's this distance where you're here, but you're not here.
Mm.
And so, and I think that so if we talk about anger, we can talk about anxiety or depression or some of the kind of larger, kind of code words that, that people might recognize, but it's the little nuances. It's just the not feeling really happy and just this low level of sadness that's just with you constantly. But the emotions are still bubbling at the surface, even though they're hard to access.
They're hard to get to. And
Hmm.
even I think Regina Townsend said, you just feel mean. And I get
Yes.
that. And when you said irritated or
Yes.
angry, and if you guys have any questions, I go ahead and put it in the question box because Dr. Loree is here. She's taking her time to do that. So make sure if you have a question for her specifically that I know about it. But going back to that, just feeling mean, just feeling
Hmm.
irritated, we know
Oof.
that anger is not a primary emotion.
Exactly.
We know that anger, and if we don't know, y'all know it now, anger is covering up what you're really feeling. So the reason that I use the word toll
Hmm.
is I'm thinking about, I'm from Philly. So I'm going up and down the highway, the New Jersey Turnpike and all the things, and I pay a toll
Yes.
in order to go forward. I pay a
Right.
toll.
Right.
And so when we are unable in that moment, and here's the thing, and tell me if I'm wrong here, because it's about having the tools to know what's going on. And when we're
Hmm.
not able to grieve in that moment, we kind of
Hmm.
disassociate, don't we?
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a delayed thing. And we're actually paying a toll for that because
Yes.
now there's this place in our life where we are angry, where we are irritated because
Hmm.
we're not at the root of that. So can you tell me how to get some of that back? If I've paid it out,
How do you get it
now
back?
that I'm angry, that's kind of a cue
Hmm.
to say, wait a minute, pause.
Hmm.
How do
Right.
I get that back?
It's having community and an extended community that understands what you're going through, that can hold space to remind you. So, and so as a therapist, I believe in therapy and the process. And so, I had my personal therapy, I had my group therapy. I've, connected with people online, and having women further along in the process remind me about what I was doing. And, Frank, you are grieving. And I'm like, you know, I mean,
Because
and
sometimes it's just hearing
yeah,
the word,
just
right?
hearing the words. And even though, I've been trained in this, I've been doing this for a long time. I had these, kind of come to Jesus conversations with my therapist, like, come on, and she just kind of had to sit me down and be like, I know. And this is what's happening for you. And I was just like, and I just, in my little stubborn way, I was like, fine, so it's not an easy process, but it, continually pointing out what was happening for me and even giving me a window into what things might feel like in the future kind of helped anchor me a bit. And so it was that anchoring that I didn't always know or trust or like what I was hearing. It made me feel very uncomfortable, but I trusted the relationship enough with my community to know that these were women who had been through this a lot, who are further along in their journeys than I am. They know what to do. They, even though I know my process is going to look a little bit different, just hearing the framework around this is what grief looks like. It's not pretty. It's uncomfortable. And this is what it looks like to go through it in order to reclaim parts of yourself. And while you're attempting to do that, know that there still might be a part of you that doesn't feel authentic in it. And at the same time, it's important for you to be intentional about it. And so it was that level of awareness that I think helped me work through this piece around grief. And I just like weaved in and out of the process too. Grief is not linear, so, you do the work and then you're just like, oh, I need a break. And, I need to focus on something else. But yeah, those were things that were really helpful, I think, just more generally for me.
Well, you said some amazing things, because finding a group, finding women that have walked the walk with you, next to you, before you, because the reality is when we are tasked with something heavy, such as grief, there will come a time where that testimony where you will reach back and you will grab the sister to your right or the sister to your left. And that too is included, I assume, in the healing. That's what
Yes.
that's what this is for me. But something that you said that I really hope y'all heard is that Dr. Loree, who is a therapist, has a therapist. And I think that that's beautiful for you to mention and to share with us, because a lot of us don't really recognize that therapists are people with full lives and experiences, and there is a load in helping us that you carry, and someone needs to help you in the same way, and it goes down the line. So have you always worked with a therapist? When did therapy, outside of your profession, but when did therapy become the thing that you go, I needed to be in this too?
Well, I had done some therapy before I started my graduate program, many moons ago. But when I went into my program, they were very, very clear, and I love this about my program. And they stressed the importance of you need to be doing your work if you're expecting other people to, and so there was a very real emphasis on, how are you doing your personal work? Even in our classes, when stuff would come up in our conversations, we had some brilliant professors and that would, kind of hold the boundary, but they could see when stuff was coming up when we would talk about course material. And then, in our supervision, our smaller supervision groups, they'd be like, okay, so how is that getting addressed with your personal therapy or your personal journey? So there was that level of accountability there that was instilled in our training that I've just carried with me to this day. And even though I haven't necessarily always been in therapy, but I've always made sure that when I needed to, and especially in the latter part of my career, that I've had somebody to connect with, because while it took me a while to understand what I was grieving, and I struggled with, you know, even though I'd worked with grief, it's different when you're working with somebody and then when you're experiencing it to this degree. And I'd never experienced pregnancy loss before. And so,
Yeah.
you know, and I, while I was holding space for people and I felt like I could, you know, could do that in a meaningful way, when I started going through that, you know, it was a process in learning, wow, this feels different, and it continues to show up differently. So in some ways, I really learned more about how to deal with grief and work with it after having gone through it myself too. So so it's always been therapy's always been a part of the process, and you know, so something I definitely value.
I do too. And I work with a therapist every other week. I have a standing appointment. And believe
Hmm.
it or not, my therapist is a man, y'all. I know that everybody
Hmm.
would be like, really?
Hmm.
But my therapist is a whole man that lives in
Hmm.
Florida that I talk to on Skype. And the reason that I chose him is because I've had challenging relationships with men and I wanted
Hmm.
to have a healthy relationship with a man. It wasn't about I want to understand them.
Hmm.
It was about I just want to know that it's possible to have a healthy relationship
Yes.
with a man. But also, one of the things that therapy has taught me is how to hear my own voice as
Hmm.
well. How to know that I can guide myself
Hmm.
in my grief. I want to
Hmm.
talk a little bit about grief as well because I believe it's an ongoing process, and I
Yes.
believe it's different for all of us.
Hmm.
Just to share a little bit, it's interesting. I've never been pregnant.
Hmm.
I've never experienced a pregnancy loss.
Hmm.
But I remember, and if I get emotional, I ain't gonna apologize for it. But I
Good for you.
remember, I remember, Mama Stu is on here, my mother, and I remember having a conversation with her where I was really sad and I was just really depressed, y'all. I was so
Hmm.
depressed that I went to an endocrinologist. I thought that, oh, this must be my thyroid. This
Hmm.
must be something else because I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat.
Hmm.
And I was crying and crying and crying.
Hmm.
And what I realized is that my depression was coming because I was grieving the fact that
Hmm.
I thought that this was never going to happen for me,
Yes.
that it
Yes.
was never going to happen.
Hmm.
And in talking to my mother, I said, I just feel like I need to mourn that this hasn't happened the way that I thought it will before I
Yeah.
can gain any power
Yes.
to actually make the next choice or the next
Hmm.
step in my life because
Hmm.
I'm an older woman in her wonderful 40s.
Hmm.
And I had to grieve that the idea I had in my head was not manifesting in my life.
Right.
And my mother, of course, did not want to hear her daughter cry, did
Right.
not want to hear her in pain. I don't say mourn. And this is not a comment on Mama Stu, because Mama Stu is everything, honey, because she
Hmm.
will get on that plane in 5 minutes and be here. But what it's a comment on, and that I want you to speak to, is how do we own our grief
Hmm.
in the presence of people that love us,
Hmm.
that may not understand
Mm. Yes.
what this feels like. And sometimes you feel this responsibility, like we talked
Hmm.
about before, this responsibility to keep them safe
Hmm.
when you're not okay.
Right.
How do we own our own grief without worrying about how it affects the people in our lives?
That's such a great question, Calais, because there is a delicate balance between how you own your grief and how you manage or hold space for other people who love you and are having a reaction to it as well. And you brought up a good point too, in that sometimes people don't know how to respond to grief. And our parents, and you know, my mom is watching too, and I
Hi,
know
Mom.
that hi mom, you know, and I know that she struggled too around, you know, the losses and how to talk to me, and it's like, but you know, but mom, it's hard because, you know, she hadn't experienced loss in the same way that I had, and so, you know, so in some ways it's, and if I found that something that she was saying, and that I knew that she was trying to be supportive. What I would say sometimes is, this is what it looks like for me right now, and this is what I need to hear from you. And I know what you're saying is coming from a loving place, and this is what I need to hear. And usually it's just like, okay, I hear you. And my mom kind of goes into, as I think a lot of moms do when they want to fix, loved ones, they want to fix it for us. They want to make you feel better and go into solutions in some ways. But, there's not a solution for grieving except to kind of, lean into the discomfort of whatever stage you're in.
Can you say that entire sentence one more time?
I will try. But there's the only solution for grief is to lean into the discomfort in whatever stage you're in.
That is so, I hope y'all heard that. Write it down, send it to a friend. There is no solution for grief except to lean in to whatever stage of the discomfort that you are in.
Yes.
Because that in an effect is understanding this is where I am. That's the ownership of it, I believe.
Yes.
And so to Mama Johnson, Mama Loree, and Mama Sue, we love you because we know where that love is coming from. That's coming from a place, that's coming from a mother.
It's coming from a mother.
It's coming from mother. It's coming from love. And, but we also know that we want to make sure that we don't negate our experience or suppress our experience to protect someone that really is okay. Because that's the other part of this that I want to say is that we also have to remind ourselves what we're going through deserves our time.
Definitely.
And our patience and our care and our attention. And those that are affected, they will be okay. They will be, in that moment, we can't feel that. We just want to fix it all, but they will be okay.
They will be, for sure. It's a both and. It can be hard and they'll be okay.
And they'll be okay. And you will be okay. And we will be okay.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about when we're moving through grief. And like we said, it stays with you. And so, I've heard this quote before. I actually might have said it now that I think about it, about having a relationship with grief so that it's not the enemy.
Right.
So it may not be your best friend, no. It's not my best friend, but it definitely is. I want to be acquainted with my grief because it's part of who I am.
Right.
And the other thing that I have to get acquainted with is the anxiety. And I believe that anxiety really lives very fully in the infertility journeys of men and women, because where anxiety is about having some sort of conclusion or it's about getting the goal, and we don't know what's going to work. Can we talk a little bit about the anxiety?
The anxiety is real. I mean, when you think about how we're socialized, and we're socialized to believe that, we follow a certain trajectory, and, and there's an assumption that we're going to couple. And for some of us, we're going to get married, and then we're going to have children. And so there's a certain path that, that we can kind of get socialized into believing that we need to follow. But when things aren't that clear, then I think that becomes this trigger point for anxiety. It's like, well, I'm not married yet, or, I haven't found a partner I want to couple with, or, there might be some uncertainties once you do couple or decide to have a child. Like, is this going to happen or isn't it? And then if you're dealing with a diagnosis on top of that, that makes it even more difficult. Again, it increases the level of frustration because there's not a sense of clarity. And the reality throughout all of this, and as many people who have grown their families, there's still no guarantee that we'll be parents. And that's a hard reality to face. there's no reality that, I mean, there's no guarantee we'll be parents. There's no guarantee that we'll be able to grow families the way that we want to, or, because an adopting isn't necessarily as easy as people think. And, just things might not unfold the way that we had expected or hoped. And so that's where the grief comes in again, because you're dealing with and mourning the reality of what you thought. So, or what you had hoped for, and dealing with the reality of what's there.
It's almost like it all does kind of come back to grief on some
Mm-hmm.
level. It's really part of the ongoing story, and how we care for ourselves emotionally. And you
Mm-hmm.
talked about triggers, and you talked about there not being a guarantee.
Yes.
And to that point, which I think is something that we need to hear and understand, for our mental and emotional health.
Mm-hmm.
I remember having a session not too long ago where, now in Warrior Wednesdays, we do talk about faith. I am a
Yeah.
woman of faith.
Mm-hmm.
I need that guiding light
Mm-hmm.
that is God for me. And so God has been telling me something, y'all,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's been confirming it over and over and over again. But it ain't happening in my
Right.
life.
Right.
So
Exactly.
I don't see it. And I hear you, but where is it at?
Right.
So then what happens to me? Anxiety comes in, the
Right.
frustration comes in, the anger comes in. Can I trust you? I do believe telling God in my real self that I'm upset, that I'm
Yeah.
angry.
Yes.
And one of the things my therapist said to me is, before you get angry, what's the emotion that you're feeling? Because we know
Mm-hmm.
anger is not primary. And I said, lonely and sad. And he kind of looked at me, and then he finally said, how about powerless?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And once I
Yeah.
heard the word powerless,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it clicked, because
Yes.
we are not in control.
No.
We are
Mm-mm.
not in control. How do we, how do we accept powerlessness in a way where we can quell the storm a little bit and trust that
Mm-hmm.
our lives will still be in our favor? Because what he
Mm-hmm.
said to me is, you feel powerless, but God loves you. And
True.
that's the other truth.
That
So
is.
how do we quell it in a way where we know life is still for us and not against us?
And that's a journey in getting there. The word that immediately came to mind, listening to you talk about that sense of powerlessness and what your therapist had shared, was what my therapist had shared with me, is just like, you're surrendering. And
Ooh,
and so I, always just, I have a literally a physical kind of snarky reaction to it, because I it's hard. It is hard, and it's the balance between, I think your personal knowing of what you need to do, but then you just don't like it, because I think, we have this kind of relationship with control as well, because that helps us create a sense of safety. And when those two are at odds, I think it can increase, the anxiety and the frustration that we feel, and also kind of keep us more disconnected from our faith too, because it's like, wait a second, there's supposed to be a plan and a promise and a provision, but it's not always it's not always the plan that we had come up with. And so the surrender for me, is recognizing that in this moment, I just get very, focused on where I am in the moment right now. And that's partly the therapeutic tool that my therapist, helped me, work through, is knowing that you're just stringing together moments of now, where you just have to recognize, like, in this moment, you're okay. You're safe. Yes, you might be struggling, and, like, just get grounded as you can. And so that piece of surrender, and learning how to surrender in that way, and build on those moments, kind of helped me through that hump a little bit.
I love that. I love that, because I actually love the word powerless and
Mm-hmm.
surrender
Mm-hmm.
together,
Mm-hmm.
because they're so valid. But one is like, okay, that is what I feel. You're right.
Yes.
I'm not
Yes.
angry. I'm hurt, yes, but I feel power. I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
can't control the
Mm-mm.
outcome
Mm-mm.
of this IVF, of this
Mm-hmm.
implantation, of whether or not a man walks into my life or a woman walks into my life. I can't control whether or not this baby is going to stay in my body. I
Right.
don't have the control.
Right.
And so there's a powerlessness,
Mm-hmm.
but the surrender of the need to control, and knowing that life is still for you, I
Yes.
think is the way that we can comfort ourselves, and
Mm-hmm.
also take the expectation
Mm-hmm.
that we're supposed to be in any other moment other
Right.
than the one that we are in.
Right.
Because the reality is, I never thought I would be sitting here talking on Warrior Wednesdays, talking to you, were
Right.
it not for me freezing my eggs,
Mm-hmm.
were it not for the experiences that you had. And when you say finding a group, we're in this group,
Yes. And
and
this,
we
oh,
go ahead.
sorry. No, and
No,
I
go
want it.
ahead.
And the piece around surrender too, just it feels like it also helps you reclaim a little bit of your power, because we might not have control over the outcome, but we do have control over how we handle things. So to me, that just feels like a beautiful, kind of like just chapter or piece of the chapter. Yeah, where it just kind of flows together. It's a pathway to help you reclaim what you feel like you're losing.
I love that. That
Mm-hmm.
in that powerlessness, surrender is a way for you to reclaim some of your power. Is
Mm-hmm.
knowing that you can let go,
Mm-hmm.
and that
Mm-hmm.
you can trust the next parts of your journey. I
Mm-hmm.
love all of these comments. Yes, because that's where anxiety comes from me. This is Broken Brown Egg saying I start to feel like being out of control means I'm non-essential and the
Yes.
universe is not for me. That's where
Mm-hmm.
the fear comes in. Can we talk about fears? Broken Brown Egg, you better give us our
I
whole life
know.
in here. You know,
I know. I know. She
Regina
comes with it.
Townsend,
Regina, I know.
do not listen. For those that don't know Regina Townsend from Broken Brown Egg, please follow her immediately.
Yes.
She was on
Yes.
Warrior Wednesday. She gave me my whole life. She was my therapist during that particular day. And she gave me my whole life. And she talked about fear. And before I get into, well, fear actually kind of goes along with anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
it's false evidence of appearing real. But let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's the acronym that a lot of people use. But let's talk about it, because I think that there is, well, I'll ask you, is there a healthy amount of fear? Is there a part of fear in our journeys as people in fertility and beyond infertility where there's a healthy amount of it?
I like to, I've heard that acronym before, fear is like false evidence appearing real. And at the same, I think we have to honor that, as much as I think that acronym is a way to help us deal with fear and keep it in perspective so doesn't become overwhelming. But yes, I do think there is a piece of fear that's healthy, but or that tells us something that we need to pay attention to.
Ah,
And so that for me, when I think about feelings and what they mean or why they're surfacing immediately, I ask my clients, well, what do those feelings want us to know? So what is the fear wanting us to know? And if it were sitting, right next to you and it had its own voice, what would it be telling us? Because that way you can, I think, kind of understand what is informing it, what's contributing to it, so that you get to deal with that. And a lot of times in the fertility world, this fear of, well, what if I don't have a child? Or what if I'm not able to have a second child? Or what if I don't couple? Or, just all of these what ifs. And it's still this, and then that's part of the disconnect between where you envisioned yourself versus where you are, and trying to bridge that gap. So, so I think there is a piece that we need to expect and normalize, but not pathologize.
I love that. And I hope you guys wrote that down, that what is fear here to tell me?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, that's a way of surrendering, getting the
Mm-hmm.
power and asking a question that you then can internalize and hear the answer to. And the reason I say internalize is because, you know, I love being a part of the fertility community. I think we are the most amazing community and the most amazing members, but it's all kind of a group that we really didn't want to be in,
Right.
right? Like, I mean,
Right.
that's the reality, y'all. We didn't sign up willingly but
Right.
it became what our experience and our journey is. And we gained power over our own story to be able to sit here and have the broken brown egg and her normal and Warrior Wednesdays and be Dr. Loree Johnson. We are taking the power of our story back. But what you said about the fear and what it's there to tell you, is that all connected to hearing your own instinct, your own
Mm-hmm.
voice? And the reason I say that is because we had a wonderful woman on, Vanessa Hay from the UK last week, and she talked
Mm-hmm.
about the fact that she had gone through several rounds of IVF, but I think in one of her first rounds, she had a dream that her pregnancy test said, "You are a mother."
That's beautiful.
And after her implantation. And she took a pregnancy test at home later, and it said negative. And then she started to spot and to bleed. Then when she went into the doctor's office, they gave her a urine test, and it also said negative, in which she was still bleeding. And she insisted, she did not ask, she insisted that they give her a blood test because she could not get out of her mind,
Mm-hmm.
you are a mother. So something, God was telling her this.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day they called and said, are you still bleeding? We got your test results. You're pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And we're afraid you're bleeding because you're miscarrying.
Mm-hmm.
So, how that relates, obviously, there's fear for
Mm-hmm.
her.
Yes.
Fear taking that pregnancy test, fear of, I got two negatives, but something is telling me, fear
Mm-hmm.
of getting another negative. So, how do we connect, or is there a connection between what we fear and what we know? You understand what I'm saying?
I think so. I mean, that what a powerful kind of testimony around, listening to her sense of intuition, and when you're in the face of fear. And I think that, interestingly, I went to this place where I find that it's hard for women that I work with, because I do work with women who've suffered, significant losses or repeated losses. And what ends up happening is you do lose that sense of connection, of being able to have that, that connection to your intuition or that knowing. And
Oh,
so there's this relearning, piece of things. But, it's like, I think that you have to honor when that comes up too, and to keep it in context. And so thank goodness that she was able to really take heed and trust, like what was happening in her body, because so much of this journey, again, disconnects you from yourself. And so it can be hard to read, okay, is this anxiety or is this intuition? And that's a very real thing, I think, for some people to kind of, to differentiate between. But I think that it's still entirely possible for people to have that sense of groundedness, and to know, and thank goodness she had a medical team that supported her, because there are some doctors who might have just been like, well, no, this is what the test said. You don't really need a blood test. But,
right.
but I think this is where, I think we need to listen to ourselves as much as possible, even when we are feeling anxious, or we're feeling like, there's these intense feelings that are surrounding us, to make sure that we advocate for ourselves.
Yes, because it's so important, you guys, if you don't hear anything else, to always advocate for yourself, because there is going to be the grief, the fear, the anxiety, all of those things are
Yeah.
peppering us. They're
Yes.
seasoning us.
Yes.
And in our experience, and sometimes we can't hear our own thoughts, our intuition, which I think really is God's voice. For me, that is
Yeah.
the instinct of that. And can
Hmm.
we talk a little bit? I see all these beautiful comments. Shauna Wick says, I lost my 2-month-old daughter to SIDS
Oh,
and
I'm
have been trying to
sorry.
conceive since. I'm so, so sorry,
I'm
Shauna Wick.
sorry.
I'm sorry. You guys, prayer hands, you guys know how we do. Send Shauna some prayer hands and some flowers. Hers was negative yesterday. We love you, Shauna. Thank you for
Hmm.
sharing that with us. Prayer hands and flowers, you guys. I need them, and I need them now for Shauna Wick, please. Thank you. So one of the things that I also want to talk about, and I commend you, Shauna, actually, for what I'm about to say, is triggers.
Hmm.
because Shauna just had a traumatic experience
Mm-hmm.
2 months ago, as she said. We love you, Shauna, and being here could be a very big trigger.
Mm-hmm.
But can we talk a little bit about the triggers that happen, the baby showers,
Mm-hmm.
the invites, the friend that gets pregnant for the first, second, third, fourth, fifth time around
Mm-hmm.
you?
Mm-hmm.
The Can we talk a little bit about how normal that actually is?
Very much so, very much so. And triggers, triggers are challenging because they make you feel, when you're dealing with, it goes back to that grief, and you're feeling mean because you have all of these feelings where you just don't want to have to deal with it. And, and as someone who was, I supported everybody in my tribe who wanted to be a parent, and I'm like the last one standing, so to speak. And so it gets to the point where you have to be very protective of yourself and have those boundaries and knowing what knowing what you need. And one of the things that I think is so important is is managing expectations about how you are going to respond to those triggers. Because I think some people think that, oh, you need to be happy for people, and this is how you show happiness or what have you, regardless of what your internal experience is. But again, you can't deny what you're feeling. So if it's hard to go to the baby shower, and I made it a rule actually where I just stopped going to baby showers, and I would have my partner handle the gifts and all of that because it was just too much for me. Then you need to be okay with those ground rules, and knowing that it doesn't always have to be like that, but for right now it is. And so honoring what you need in that moment is important.
Honoring, y'all write it down. Shauna's getting all her flowers and her love, and we're so glad she said that it's helping her and she needed this. We love you. And honoring what you need in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Honoring your boundaries. Y'all, you don't have to go to the baby shower if it's going to take you into a dark place.
Right.
You don't have to be there for everybody if you need to be there for yourself in that moment, because those triggers, sorry, my AirPods just keep coming out today. Somebody's talking about me. I don't know who, but those triggers, they can happen multiple times a day.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
Multiple times a day. So, and they also can be sometimes the thing that makes us the mean, the other part of mean. So do you recommend, so that we can find those boundaries, because we don't always know them yet, right? We don't always know. Do you recommend journaling, talking to other women, asking them how they deal with their triggers? How do you recommend we identify them? How do we feel them in our body?
Well, for me, I think it's paying attention to what like literally your body. I have a physical reaction. I feel it in my chest and sometimes in the pit of my stomach. And, so if it's helpful to write things down, absolutely. And also identifying, these are the steps that feel helpful for you in addressing them. So.
Uh-oh. I lost the audio. Can you hear me? Oh, there you are. Now I got you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that.
The steps in addressing them. That's where I lost.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So the steps in addressing them, and knowing that you might have a different reaction depending on the situation. So if it's, child-centered activities, then you might plan to either not go, or you might show up late or leave early, but it's paying attention to what your emotional reaction is going to be, and knowing that you have to give yourself time to figure out how you need to respond. Sometimes I think we try to rush into, behaving like we did before we started experiencing these losses. And then we don't really, we find ourselves in like this landmine of, this emotional experience. And then you're feeling overwhelmed with emotion and crying in the bathroom. And I might be speaking from personal experience. And
me too, girl. But, I cry daily, and I appreciate every tear that falls. Yes.
And so it actually took some time to figure figure out, wow, you know what? I can put some more boundaries around this. And so hearing what other people did was helpful. And I had to tailor it for myself as well because of what I do for work and, and holding space. So I was particularly vulnerable because I was getting it personally and professionally. Whereas some people do get, a bit of a reprieve, so they have more time and space to figure out, like, okay, what their boundaries need to look like for them. So
I love that. And to that point, can we talk a little bit about when the trigger happens in an actual conversation? Because if we talk about, like, we can stay away from the baby shower, we cannot do the this or that. I see Shauna had said something that her sister is pregnant with her sixth kid and had the audacity to tell me she doesn't want another child. Shaking my head. Well, I will say to you, Shauna, that I know that hurt. So I'm sorry that was something that is very hurtful for you to hear and experience. And that's really what I want to get to, because in the conversation space, sometimes well-meaning people or not well-meaning people, depending, will ask you about where's the baby?
right.
Ask you about your fertility journey. Where's the second baby? Well, or comment on well, it's okay, you had a miscarriage. If you can still get pregnant again. And they will just be dismissive of something that you are constantly going through. And you're in that moment of conversation. It could be your elder, it could be a family member, it could be a friend, it could be a stranger.
Yes.
In that moment, what tools or thoughts do you have about how to, like you said, finding your different ways to respond?
And I think your response may depend on how close you are to that person, and also what mood you're in, quite frankly, because we've all fielded questions where, it's like, do you have kids, or, what's going on? And there are people that they're not really particularly close to, and you just kind of say no or whatever, because you don't really want to get into it. And then there's some times where you just feel like, you're in a space where it's like, no, my kids are on the other side, or, or, you just kind of get real with it. But I think there's no hard and fast rule about how you should respond. I think it's more about, what do you feel like you need to do in that moment? And is it, do you feel like you need to honor, like, your losses or honor your circumstance in a way, but, is the person really do you have the relationship there enough to kind of honor that experience? Is it appropriate? Because sometimes when people, strangers might, when you're meeting strangers at a party and this has happened, it's like, oh, do you have kids? And, it's like, you don't really want to get into the fact, well, I've had 4 pregnancy losses and blah, 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 or what have you. But then sometimes it's like, it's a rude question. It can be a very insensitive question for people. And you just sometimes need to let people know, what, their question is inappropriate. And that might be a way to acknowledge it. But I think it really goes back to, what do you have the capacity to handle in that moment? It kind of go, and not judge yourself. If you're feeling a little flip, then you're feeling a little flip, doing what you need to do for you.
I love that. And I love that you said, and not judging yourself, because it's true. You could be feeling a little flip, and now everybody here on Warrior Wednesdays, and my mama can attest to this because she's the one who taught it to me, but everybody here knows I'm going to tell people bluntly, that's none of your business. Stay out of my ovaries. That's me. That's me. Yep. And I journeyed to that. I froze my eggs. And so I did that to take some of the pressure off. It's potential fertility. As we said earlier, there are no guarantees. But when people say, well, what are you going to do with those eggs? You're not about to put that pressure back on me.
Nope.
So I have, in my circle, they know, don't come for Kelly in this space, because it's not going to happen. But I want to make sure that women and men know here that what you're saying is that finding out what you're comfortable with, that's going to still keep you safe. Because when people say things that make us angry, it's hurting us.
Exactly.
It's really it's the hurt of it. It feels insensitive. It feels invasive. And we have the right to know that, feel that, and then respond in a way that still keeps us safe. Exactly. And sometimes, and you can tell me, and then I want to go to one other thing, one other topic, but sometimes we have to know that it's okay to be assertive.
Yes.
It's okay to be private, and it's okay, and tell me if I'm wrong or right, to understand that not everybody deserves access
Mm-hmm.
to your personal fertility journey. And
Mm-hmm.
that we have to know what friends or family or acquaintances that we have that feel like they speak our language and feel safe in that. And the reason I bring that up is I have people that are very, very close to me that I love dearly, but their language in this doesn't keep me safe.
Right.
And so I have to know, as much as I love you, we can go on vacation together, we can go to brunch together, but I don't bring this into that space because that's not safe for me.
Exactly.
Is it okay for us to know who's safe and who's not? And
Yes.
I put it in my phone. I
Mm-hmm.
literally put next to somebody's name, don't talk about X, Y, and Z with this
That's good.
person,
Right.
so that I don't re-injure myself by thinking maybe this time the conversation will be different.
Yes.
You know what I
I love
mean?
I love that. I love that reminder because not everybody deserves that access to you. And I like that intentionality that you have around jotting down who is safe and who's not, because we can tend to forget. And in the spirit of relationship and trying to do the repair or whatever kind of socialization we've had in our families about needing to forgive people and to be the better person, so to speak. And I think that pushes us into having more conversations than what we really need to have, or in ways that aren't necessarily healthy. But what is going to preserve your emotional safety in that moment is key. So whatever you need to do to keep that in place, and do so unapologetically, and being assertive about that is important.
I love that. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Unapologetically, y'all, go ahead and make a list of the people tonight, if you have to, of who feels safe for you to allow into, because this is personal. This is your
Very much
body.
so.
This is your life. This is mental and emotional health. It is really about keeping yourself safe, knowing how you operate, being aware of your triggers, and saying, I'm in charge
Mm-hmm.
of how, who, what, when I experience all of the emotions that come with infertility. And let's go on to, okay, we've been through some stuff,
Mm-hmm.
single or not, and we want to have our life back.
Mm. Yes.
We want to get some normalcy back, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
part of the whole grieving process, whether it's grieving it hasn't happened yet, or there's a loss, and all of the different areas of that, is at some point you go, I feel like I want to get back on my feet. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
I want to have sex again. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I want to be intimate again. I feel like I want to date again. I feel like whatever it might be. How
Yes.
do we, going through these things, get our sea legs back in the
Yes.
game, and marriage and single? How do we get back to us?
Yes. I think you have to remember what were you doing before all of this took over? And then being intentional about reconnecting to those parts of yourself. And so for me, one of the things that my husband and I did was we actually started traveling. And I called it, I look back on it now and I call it our grief tour. But because of where I was, and I remember planning each trip and where I was in our journey. And doing that in that way was so powerful. And whether it's just, however you decide to date or put yourself out there, it was so nice to carve out space outside of this fertility or grief journey that we had been through, and to not feel defined by all of the reminders that were in our house, and where we were, baby dancing or whatever, and just the reminders of just the scheduling with IVF or what have you, because it just became really hard to be around or be in our space because there were just so many reminders, like I said. But so we had these experiences that actually drew us closer, and we were able to rediscover parts of our relationship that weren't marred by grief. And so having some distance from that, and actually relearning each other is important, because it can be so defining when you're going through fertility stuff or grief. It's like you think, oh, well, at least in fertility, if you're going through treatments, that only your fertility is going to be impacted. But no, every aspect of your life is impacted. And so
Right.
it's like this reclaiming that you go through where it's like, no, we're more than this. And, what
And
were
can
we
I
doing? Yeah.
ask you, is, I'm single. Anybody got somebody out there for me, let me know, because she's not shamed. But can I ask you, does
Mhm.
somebody take the lead in that, in terms of reclaiming
Mhm.
yourselves, reclaiming your relationship? Because
Mhm.
I also want to speak to the relationships where the tension of infertility may have caused some cracks that are yet to be repaired or may
Mhm.
not be
Mhm.
repaired, because I believe that that's definitely there. But in reclaiming it, in
Mhm.
deciding not to go in this room, or not to look at certain things because it's still reminding you of grief, is there someone that takes the lead in that partnership?
Yes, I think that what ends up happening and what we see sometimes in therapy is that more women are reaching out, or we're if we think about the whole self-help kind of community, it's mainly female driven. So sometimes that can suggest that we prioritize our self-care and mental health a little bit more than men, even though I think that is changing. But it might fall on one person to kind of say, hey, this is what I need. This is how I'm feeling. I'm feeling disconnected from you. I'm feeling disconnected from myself. This is what helps me feel better about me right now. And I'd like to do this in order to feel better about us. And so I think it's kind of opening up that conversation about what you're missing and what you might be needing more of. And it's hard to do. You don't want to talk about the cracks that fertility creates. It's not pretty. And
Right.
but leaning into it is important, and creating space for what each of you might need individually, and also what you might need as a couple. But the reclaiming just might look different depending on, like I said, what your needs are.
And honoring what those needs are, and
Hmm.
like you said, unapologetic, and I imagine taking your time with it, and
Yes.
understanding.
Hmm.
And are there, because we talked a little bit about triggers, and here in this intimacy space, because sex creates
Hmm.
pregnancy,
Hmm.
are there triggers in, becoming intimate again and finding yourself in intimacy and sex again
Hmm.
after infertility, after loss, or when you're just trying to get your groove back? Can you just speak to the I guess the normalcy, or for women or men
Hmm.
that are okay, we're gonna have sex, but this just doesn't feel, I don't feel me yet. Can we
Right.
speak a little bit to that's okay?
Yes, we really need to be talking more about sex for sure,
Ooh.
because it breaks my heart when I, get a message, or I'm talking with clients who, don't really understand the fact that having sexual issues when you're going through fertility issues is quite normal, and experiencing some element of, I don't want to call it sexual dysfunction. That feels very, just pejorative. But let's face it, when you have people who are all up in your cycle, and you're having to track when and telling you when to do it, it takes something away from the process. It doesn't feel as organic, or as natural, and so people, and there's usually a trajectory that we see happen. At first you might struggle a little bit, but you kind of go through the tests, and excuse me, not just go through the tests, but because they'll tell you when you start to do the tracking, they actually tell you when to kind of baby dance and all of that. But what happens over time is, when there's more interference, the less likely you're to have that kind of sexual connection, and so people might struggle with arousal, or men might struggle with ejaculating, and because doing this or performing on demand is not usually something that people find sexy. So that's part of the relearning or reclaiming your sexual selves outside of fertility treatments, and doing what you can to that helps you do that. And so whether, how you all, experience foreplay and getting back into that is important. And remembering, okay, well, what were we doing before all of this stuff took over?
Yes,
So you have
yes.
that reference point.
So you have that reference point, and you have
Hmm.
that understanding, because I really appreciate what you said about men especially, because we're going to be having men on Warrior Wednesdays next month to talk about their experiences with their own infertility or infertility with their partner, and how that all works, but not being able to ejaculate on command, like you said. And if a woman is going through a lot of the IVF situations, you're feeling like almost your body isn't yours.
Yes.
It's this experiment of, well, will I get pregnant? And it's full of hormones, right? So these hormones are also interacting with our emotions, interacting with our ability to hear ourselves, hear our body, and know these things. So you guys, if you haven't heard anything, just understand what Dr. Loree is saying, is that having those conversations of getting back to yourself and not feeling yourself is quite normal. And would you suggest also even finding some new ways that may not have been us, but maybe there's, dating again? Like, is there, would you even suggest, hey,
Yeah.
we got to find this again?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so it's like finding what worked for you. And so, that's why we ended up traveling a lot. We made sure that we had date days or date nights, where we were trying something new. And so because we were doing that together, it was another point of connection for us. And this is really and that's what sex is about. It's about feeling connected to your partner. And when it's not happening in that way, of course, you're feeling, just upset and frustrated, but it's possible to reclaim and actually get to something even better, because, now you have this really big monster that you've just slayed together. And, you kind of have a little, hopefully a little pep in your step, knowing that that's something that you all did together. So and use that as momentum for, let's get to know each other. It's a new iteration of our relationship, a new chapter.
I love it. I love it. And just briefly, and we'll see if there's any questions. If you guys have a question, go ahead and put it in there now. Hopefully, we have covered a lot of wonderful subjects here, and I appreciate that. Is there any coaching or advice that you could give to someone that may be going through an experience of infertility with a partner where it tore them apart, where it may not have been the outcome that they expected, that they wanted, and they're learning more about their incompatibility, or that this might not be, one person may not be able to do this again, even though the other person wants to? Can you talk, because we love the fact that there's ways that it can really build a couple better.
Yes.
But there's also ways that it's a disconnect. Is there anything that you can offer for those people?
It's really hard to hear when couples struggle to the point of, just separation, or, what is that, being in different places mean. And sadly, I've seen that it's hard to reconcile when one person wants to keep going and one person's like, I just can't do this. And so, I really advise people not to make any major decisions when they're in that space, because I think that, you've just come off of this really grueling journey. You want the pain to end, and you think, okay, I just can't do this, or we can't do this. And don't make any major decisions about your relationship, but give yourself time to really mourn and see if there is if there's another kind of compromise that can be made, where one person's able to either, meet them where they're at, or, you're kind of able to come to some sort of compromise, but it's a hard one. It's a hard one. And so I think time is really important to give yourselves, because you just don't want to make any major decisions when you're in the midst of that emotional intensity.
I think that is so important that you said that, to not make any major decisions when you're in the midst of that intensity. I think that's important for married couples, dating couples, and even a single girl like me to not exact anything when I'm in the midst of whatever I'm feeling about this journey. And for those that might be going through secondary infertility and they have a child. So now we have a couple, and maybe they had infertility, but had a child, and now they're going through it maybe again, or it didn't happen before. So now we have a couple that has somebody to take care of, and they're also going through this intensity. How do they keep it together? Because there's somebody watching. There's somebody little that can see, if there's tension, that can see
Yeah.
when there's grief happening, that can
Hmm.
see what do they need to know to keep themselves, their relationship safe, and their child safe. Do they bring the child along? What do they what tips?
Yes, I think that you share in a very limited yet appropriate, age appropriate way for the child, because kids are very intuitive,
Yes.
and they have a way of knowing, even when parents aren't talking about it, they have a way of knowing that something's off with mom and dad, or parent, whatever parent. So I think that what parents can do is literally share, this has been hard for, for us. And this
Hmm.
is what it looks like when we work through things. So again, finding a way to share information that's age appropriate. You don't want the child knowing all the details or anything like that, but just knowing, yeah, we are feeling sad. We wanted to have a sister for you or a brother for you, and it's not happening, and we just have different ways of dealing with it, which is okay. So you're framing it, you're framing it differently.
You're framing it in a way
Hmm.
that's safe for the child, but
Hmm.
doesn't exclude them necessarily from understanding that they are seeing something. Because
Exactly.
sometimes sometimes when we just act like something isn't happening, like you said, children are very intuitive. They know something's going on. So I
Right.
think that's great advice, to frame it in a way where they can understand it and that you can keep your relationship healthy and safe. So let me see if we have any questions. I know we covered a lot, so we might not. We don't, because we got probably all
Okay.
of those questions answered. But where can everybody find you, Dr. Loree, so that they can get your great advice, your help? What are all your social medias? What do we need to know? Where do we get you?
Yes, so I'm on Instagram at Dr. Loree Johnson, Drloree, Johnson. You can also follow me on Facebook and Dr. Loree Johnson there, but I tend to hang out on Instagram a little bit more.
You tend to hang out on Instagram a little bit more. And are you
Yes.
available? Are you taking virtual appointments if there's a couple or somebody here that would love to start to work with you?
Yes, I'm full with my couples right now. I tend to see, I devote probably about 25% of my practice to couples, and I'm full with that, but I am accepting individuals right now.
You are accepting
Yes.
individuals right now. Well,
Yes.
we thank you. You guys put a whole lot of flowers up for Dr. Loree Johnson, who was
Thank
here
you.
today to be with us. You are an amazing person, an amazing infertility warrior. We thank you for all of the work that you've done, even
Thank
through
you.
your journey in speaking into this community. And I'm honored, and it's such a pleasure. If there's anything I can ever do to spread the word with you, around you, for you,
Thank
please
you.
reach out to me. We thank you. I honor you. And I'm
Thank
really,
you.
really happy you were here. So thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
All
Thank
right,
you so
Dr.
much.
Loree,
Take care.
come back again.
I will. I'd love to. I'd love to. Thank you
Great.
for
There's
having
all your
me.
flowers, darling. They're coming from the UK. They're coming from everywhere. So thank you. Thank you very much. All right,
Thank
Dr. Loree,
you.
you have
Thank
a
you.
great rest of your day.
You
All
too.
right, y'all.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Know how I do this. Let's see. Oh, they're giving you so much love. They can't see my, there we go. Okay. You guys, isn't she beautiful and wonderful and special and so brave? I hope that we answered a lot of your questions, that Dr. Loree answered a lot of your thoughts, and that we talked about some things that you've thought about before, maybe didn't think about before, and that you gained some new perspective, because I really, really enjoyed that Dr. Loree is there saying thank you. We thank you, Dr. Loree. We thank you for everything, framing it. We thank you for surrender. We thank you for finding our boundaries of how we need to respond, understanding ourselves. We really got some really great tools. And I really want to thank you, Dr. Loree, for speaking so effortlessly into the space of sex after infertility, how couples get together, how couples sometimes don't have something that may not be able to be repaired, and how to deal with it if you're in secondary infertility and you have a child. So I think that we talked about some things that are really important for us to know moving forward. So thank you guys for being here on Warrior Wednesdays, and I will see you next week. We're going to make sure that Dr. Cindy M. Duke comes back. Again, we're going to be talking to some men in March, honey. And so there's going to be more things to do. Thank you, Regina Townsend, for being here. Follow the Broken Brown Egg, y'all. Follow her normal, Nichelle Polston. I thank you guys. Shauna, I see you. Blessings to you. Flowers to you. You guys, thank you for being here on Warrior Wednesdays. Mama Stu, thank you for being you. And Mama Loree, thank you for being you. So I will see you guys next week on Warrior Wednesdays. I love you all so very, very much. Take care of your mental health. Mwah. I love you guys. All righty. Bye.